his time with me.
Okay.
Let me speak.
So is he going to speak as well?
Not this evening.
Okay.
So peace
Thank
be
you.
with you. My name is Rasheed Shabazz, and I'll also be discussing hidden history here in Alameda.
Need a little closer to the mic. You have a soft voice.
Okay. So my name is Rasheed Shabazz, and I'll also be discussing hidden history in Alameda. So thank you for receiving my letter and for your consideration today at removing a memorial here in Alameda that honors someone that was racist, and that being Andrew Jackson, the namesake for Alameda's first park, Jackson Park. As I mentioned in my letter to you last month, for the last 3 years, there's been a renewed effort to remove some of these symbols of these monuments to white supremacy, not only in Alameda, but in the United States and really around the world. Places like Azania or South Africa, they took down the statue of Ian Rhodes. In the city of Berkeley, they recently renamed LeConte Elementary School if they found out or came to understand he was a slaveholder and a supporter or armor of the Confederacy. And so in addition to these different memorials around the Confederacy, there's also issues of colonialism, slavery, etc. And here in Alameda this past January, the parents at Haight Elementary School, they moved to rename their school after finding out that their namesake, Henry Huntley Haight, was both racist and xenophobic. They'll be having their second renaming committee this coming Monday at 6:30 if people are interested in learning more and participating. Monday the 14th at 6:30. The call to rename Jackson Park is primarily based on his treatment of African and indigenous or Native American people, and specifically his life as a slaveholder and someone that both displaced and killed many indigenous people on this land. I know at the last meeting there was some concern expressed around some of the sources of the information that I shared, and so I shared some material with your director, and I also share that now because it wasn't read into the record, although it's included in your minutes. So in the letter, I stated that Andrew Jackson held African people in captivity. The official website of the Hermitage, which is Andrew Jackson's mansion and plantation, or his estate, it states, in reality, slavery was the source of Andrew Jackson's wealth. The Hermitage was a 1,000-acre self-sustaining plantation that relied completely on the labor of enslaved African-American men, women, and children. They performed the hard labor that produced the Hermitage's past crop, cotton. The more land Andrew Jackson accrued, the more slaves he procured to work it. Thus, the Jackson family's survival was made possible by the profit garnered from the crops worked by the enslaved on a daily basis. And again, that's from the website of the Hermitage. In addition to being a slaveholder, he earned the nickname Indian Killer for his participation in the murder of indigenous people. And so I also shared an article that was in the Washington Post last year after President Trump was to be honoring 3 Native American veterans. And in this presentation, he had an image of Andrew Jackson in the background. I'll leave it to you all to speculate what his intention may have been. And finally, as President Andrew Jackson advocated for the forced resettlement of indigenous people in the Southeast, which is commonly called today the Trail of Tears. And so he had advocated for the Indian Removal Act in 1830, which again led to the mass displacement, which is known as the Trail of Tears. The National Park Service, on their website, they actually have a trail you can go on, and they call it a journey of injustice. And so why does Alameda have a park named after Andrew Jackson? Well, if you read Woody Miner's book, Alameda at Play, which I will hope you all, because it's about our beautiful parks here, he talks about how in 1909, when there were 3 new parks that were built, Alameda Park, which is our first park, was renamed after Andrew Jackson. But he doesn't say why Andrew Jackson was chosen out of all the, I believe it was 18 or 19 other presidents that had been around at that time. And so again, I bring this all up to say Alameda should not memorialize Andrew Jackson with a public park. As I mentioned in my previous letter, a number of communities have renamed spaces named after Andrew Jackson. So in Salt Lake City, they renamed Jackson Elementary School after Mary Jackson, the NASA scientist. Democrats in Virginia renamed the Jefferson Jackson Dinner that they hold. And then before Trump's election, Harriet Tubman was set to replace Jackson on the $20 bill. Not sure what the status of that is right now. And so I'm asking this commission to consider recommending, or not consider, to recommend to the City Council that we rename Jackson Park. And my suggestion is Justice Park. And the idea is to recognize that these injustices have been inflicted by Andrew Jackson on some communities that are represented here in Alameda. And we also live in a time where I think it's really important to reflect on some of the past injustices that have taken place in this community. This last week, the remains of what is believed to be an indigenous person was found on Mound Street. And so you all may know that in 1908, huge mound, a shell mound, which had the remains of 450 people, was removed in East Alameda. There's a rock at Lincoln Park which speaks to this. There's also the forced displacement of our Japanese American neighbors that occurred here in the city of Alameda. And you can just go through the Alameda High yearbook, the Acorn from 1940 to 1943, and just see all of those people vanish. And then lastly, which is really the focus of my own personal research, and even to an extent my own experience, is the repeated mass exclusion and expulsion of African people from housing in this island. And so again, this idea of a justice park would not be justice for those people, but would be a symbolic move towards justice and stop us from having a tax-supported public park honoring somebody that committed mass and major injustices. So as you consider your decision today, I know some of the different recommendations are to conduct a study, and I had provided some resources, some primary sources that you'd be able to utilize if you direct staff to do that. And I'd encourage you, the information is available. Sound like you did a little reading recently, and just don't take too long. I would encourage you all to identify what the process would be, to select your criteria, opportunities for public engagement in the renaming, and rename Jackson Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, stay with us for